There are approximately 4 million street-legal motorcycles registered in the United States. Each year, 1 out of every 35 of those motorcycles is involved in a crash, and 1 out of every 1,200 or so is involved in a fatal crash. When fatalities per miles traveled are considered, motorcyclists are killed at about 19 times the rate of drivers and passengers of other motor vehicles. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, estimates that alcohol is a contributing factor in nearly half of all motorcycle fatalities. Clearly, enforcement of DWI laws is a key to reducing the number of alcohol-related motorcyclist fatalities. But what are the cues that we should use to detect impaired motorcyclists? NHTSA selected Anacapa Sciences to conduct the research necessary to develop a set of behavioral cues that can be used by law enforcement personnel to accurately detect motorcyclists who are operating their vehicles while intoxicated. They began by interviewing expert patrol officers from across the country to determine what behavioral cues have been used to detect impaired motorcyclists. Most officers recalled at least a few cues that they used to discriminate between DWI and normal riding. A few, primarily motorcycle officers, suggested cues that reflect considerable understanding of the mental and physical requirements of riding a motorcycle. But some officers, even those with many years' experience, reported that they believe there to be no cues that can be used to distinguish DWI from unimpaired motorcycle operation. In addition to interviewing law enforcement personnel, the research team developed a database of 1,000 motorcycle DWI arrest reports. They focused on the officers' narratives and the behaviors that motivated the stops, and correlated those behaviors with blood alcohol concentrations, or BACs. Analysis of the interviews and arrest report data resulted in an inventory of about 100 cues that have been observed by officers in association with impaired motorcycle operation. The researchers, working closely with law enforcement personnel, conducted 2 major field studies involving more than 50 sites throughout the United States. Officers recorded information about every enforcement stop they made of a motorcyclist. Those studies permitted the researchers to identify the most effective cues and to calculate the probabilities that those cues are predictive of DWI. And this is what we found. 14 cues were identified that best discriminate between DWI and unimpaired motorcycle operation, but with some surprises. The cues have been labeled as excellent predictors and good predictors, based upon the study results. Cues that are excellent predictors were found to be associated with impaired operation more than 50% of the time they were observed. Cues that are good predictors were found to be associated with DWI between 30 and 50% of the time. The special coordination and balance requirements of riding a two-wheeled vehicle provide most of the behaviors in the excellent category of cues. For example, earlier studies have established that the most common cause of single-vehicle fatal motorcycle crashes is for the road to curve and the motorcycle and rider to continue in a straight line until they strike a stationary object. This type of crash is usually caused by alcohol-impaired coordination and balance abilities. In less extreme cases, the motorcycle's turn radius expands during the maneuver. The motorcycle appears to drift to the outside of the lane or into another lane through the curve or while turning a corner. If you see a motorcycle drifting during a turn or curve, do the rider a favor and pull him over. Our study showed there is an excellent chance that he is DWI. Parking and dismounting a motorcycle can be a helpful field sobriety test. The motorcyclist must turn off the engine and locate and deploy the kickstand. He must then balance his weight on one foot while swinging the other foot over the seat to dismount. But first, the operator must decide upon a safe place to stop his bike, for example, not in a puddle of water. Problems with any step in this sequence can be evidence of alcohol impairment. We call this cue trouble with dismount. Now, not every motorcyclist you see having some form of trouble with a dismount is under the influence, but our study indicated more than 50% of them are. The typical practice at a stop is for the motorcyclist to place one foot on the ground to keep the bike upright, while leaving the other foot on the peg nearest the gear shift lever. Some riders favor placing both feet on the ground for stability. Riders whose balance has been impaired by alcohol often have difficulty with this task. They might be observed to shift their weight from side to side, that is, from one foot to another, to maintain balance at a stop. From a block away, an officer might notice a single taillight moving from side to side in a gentle rocking motion. If you observe a motorcyclist to be having trouble with balance at a stop, our study showed there is an excellent chance that he or she is DWI. The research identified 4 turning problems that are indicative of rider impairment. The gyroscopic effects of a motorcycle's wheels tend to keep a motorcycle on track as long as speed is maintained. As a motorcycle's speed decreases, the demands placed on the operator's balance capabilities increase. As a result, an officer might observe a motorcycle's front wheels or handlebars to wobble as an impaired operator attempts to maintain balance at slow speeds or during a turn. The next turning problem is late braking during a turn or on a curve. A motorcyclist normally brakes prior to entering a turn or curve so the motorcycle can accelerate through the maneuver for maximum control. An impaired motorcyclist might misjudge his speed or distance to the corner or curve, requiring him to apply the brakes during the maneuver. Third, a motorcyclist normally negotiates a turn or curve by leaning into the turn. However, when balance or speed judgment are impaired, the operator frequently attempts to sit upright through the maneuver. An improper lean angle can be detected by the trained observer. The fourth turning problem is erratic movements. An erratic movement or sudden correction of a motorcycle during a turn or curve can also indicate impaired operator ability. If you observe a motorcyclist to be unsteady during a turn or curve, brake late, assume an improper lean angle, or make erratic movements during a turn or curve, our studies showed there's an excellent chance that the motorcyclist is DWI. Vigilance concerns a person's ability to pay attention to a task or notice changes in surroundings. A motorcyclist whose vigilance has been impaired by alcohol might fail to notice that the light he has been waiting for has changed to green. A vigilance problem is also evident when a motorcyclist is inattentive to his surroundings or seemingly unconcerned with detection. For example, there is a cause for suspicion of DWI when a motorcyclist fails to periodically scan the area around his bike when in traffic, a wise defensive riding procedure to guard against potential encroachment by other vehicles. There is further evidence of impairment if a motorcyclist fails to respond to an officer's emergency lights or hand signals. If you observe a motorcyclist to be inattentive to his or her surroundings, there is an excellent chance that the motorcyclist is DWI. You are probably familiar with weaving as a predictor of DWI. If you see an automobile weaving, there is a good chance that the driver has exceeded the legal limits of alcohol. But if you observe a motorcycle to be weaving, our study showed the probability of DWI is even greater. Weaving includes weaving within a lane and weaving across lane lines, but does not include the movements necessary to avoid road hazards. If you observe a motorcyclist making erratic movements or sudden corrections while attempting to ride in a straight line, study results indicated that there is a good probability that the rider is DWI. In other words, during the study, between 30 and 50% of the time, erratic movements while going straight were observed in association with impaired operation. Obviously, riding into opposing traffic is extremely dangerous. Study results showed that when you find a motorcycle going the wrong way in traffic, there's a good chance that the operator is under the influence. This includes going the wrong way on a one-way street and crossing a center divider line to ride into opposing traffic. The study indicated a few other cues to look for as predictive of DWI. For example, operating without lights at night is a good cue.
What about speeding?
Well, motorcyclists tend to ride faster than autos, so speeding is not necessarily a predictor of DWI. However, recklessness or riding too fast for the conditions is a good cue.
How about running a red light?
Failure to stop at a red light or stop sign was a good predictor of DWI, and so was following too closely. Also, if a motorcyclist attempts to evade an officer's enforcement stop, our study showed there's a good chance that he's DWI.
Anything else?
Sure. There is a category of cues that we call inappropriate or unusual behavior. This category of cues includes behaviors such as operating a motorcycle while holding an object with one hand or under an arm, carrying an open container of alcohol, dropping an item from a motorcycle, urinating at the roadside, arguing with another motorist, or otherwise being disorderly. Study results indicate that if you observe inappropriate or unusual behavior by a motorcyclist, there is an excellent chance that the motorcyclist is DWI.
To summarize, the 14 cues found by the NHTSA study to be most predictive of DWI are presented in two categories. Excellent cues with probabilities of 50% and greater include drifting during a turn or curve, trouble with dismount, trouble with balance at a stop, turning problems, inattentive to surroundings, inappropriate or unusual behavior, and weaving. Good cues, those with probabilities of DWI between 30 and 50%, include erratic movements while going straight, operating without lights at night, recklessness, following too closely, running a stoplight or sign, evasion, and wrong way. All of these cues apply during both daylight and nighttime conditions.